enough to pick up their pace. But as soon as we rounded the next bend and saw how much there was still left to climb, their heads dropped and their shoulders slumped, while I smiled to myself and kept grinding. Bent at the waist, my palms pressed onto my knees, driving more power into the balls of my feet as they struck the ground, which allowed me to chop the climb down to size, one step at a time. People who've spent time on high country trails know the heartbreak of a false summit. When all you want is for the incline to stop kicking your ass, it tricks you into thinking you've made it, only to reveal that you aren't even close. But you don't have to be a trail rat to know that feeling. In life, there are plenty of false summits. Maybe you think you've rocked an assignment at work or school, only to have your teacher or supervisor rip it to pieces or tell you to start over again. False summits can come in the gym, when you're doing a hard circuit workout and think you've hit the last set, only to hear from your coach or trainer, or from a quick glance at your own notes, that you have to go back through the entire circuit one last time. We all take a punch like that every once in a while, but those who tend to crane their necks, looking for the crest of the mountain as they beg for their suffering to end, are the ones who get smashed the most by any false summit. We have to learn to stop looking for a sign that the hard time will end. When the distance is unknown, it is even more critical that you stay locked in, so the unknown factor doesn't steal your focus. The end will come when it comes, and anticipation will only distract you from completing the task in front of you to the best of your ability. Remember, the struggle is the whole journey. That's why you're out there. It's why you signed up for this race or that class or took the damn job. There is great beauty when you are involved in something that is so hard, most people want it to end. When Hell Week ended, most of the guys who survived cheered, wept tears of joy, high-fived or hugged one another. I got the Hell Week blues because I'd been immersed in the beauty of grinding through it and the personal growth that came with it. We can make any obstacle as big or small as we like. It's all in the way we frame it. Going into Leadville, I expected one long, hard motherfucking day. But how many inconsequential days had I lived by then? Why not spend one single day doing something I'll be proud of for the rest of my life? Like Elmo said to Loudon Swain in his apartment before the wrestling match of his life in the movie Vision Quest, it ain't the 6 minutes, it's what happens in that 6 minutes. When you're climbing a mountain or involved in any other difficult task, the only way to free yourself from the struggle is to finish it. So why bitch about it when it gets hard? Why hope it will end soon when you know it will end eventually? When you complain and your mind starts groping for the eject button, you are not bringing your best self to the task, which means you are actually prolonging the pain. The hard chargers keep their heads down and hammer away. They have trained their minds to stay hard in those hard moments. They recognize the false summit for what it is and will always act as if they are nowhere near the top. Most people slow down and suffer on a steep trail, but slope and elevation are of no consequence to the hard charger. They keep their mind in attack mode until there are no more mountains to climb, and when they actually reach the top, they wish it had lasted a little bit longer. After about 4 miles of climbing, I jogged through the dip between 2 peaks at Hope Pass and shook my head. Over already? I thought, as I picked up the pace and hammered the descent toward the turnaround at mile 50, where my crew was waiting. I was just off my Leadville PR pace of 22 hours and 15 minutes, which put me in the top 40 in the entire field. Not that I knew that at the time. I didn't wear a fitness watch. I wore a $10 special from Walmart that I bought the day before because I didn't want knowledge of my pace clouding my mindset. I was focused on one thing, the task at hand. After a short rest to eat and hydrate, it was time to retrace my steps and climb up Hope Pass from the backside, this time with a pacer. My old friend TJ had stuffed his pack with the extra food, water, and gear he thought I might need, and his legs were fresh. His presence pushed me up that ascent at a strong pace, and although it had been some time since I'd run trails consistently, I had become a good technical trail runner over the years. That muscle memory clicked back in, which enabled me to attack the descent and fly down the other side. The final major climb in the race loomed at mile 75. It's called Powerline, and that one has a few false summits too. TJ had a pair of trekking poles with him, and he kept offering them to me. He had been annoyed watching people with poles pass us on the backside of Hope Pass while I was still hiking hands on knees. We caught most of them on the way down and on the flats, only to give up ground again on Powerline. Come on, man, just try the poles for a mile or two, he said. See if you like them. Fuck that, I snapped, as 2 more people passed us up. In the old days, that was cheating. I was cooked by then. For the first time all day, the accumulated miles and my pace were starting to wear on me, and he could see it. I'm telling you, Goggins. I looked over as TJ held them out like he knew he was presenting a weapon of last resort to a grumpy samurai, still clinging to the old ways. I snatched them, irritated that I was abandoning the hard-ass old ultra ethic. Then again, the sport had evolved, and this was an opportunity for me to evolve with it. As he promised, those poles took so much pressure off my legs, they suddenly felt fresh, and I charged up that steep-ass mountain. I was moving better and faster than I had in several hours. I passed seasoned ultra runners like so many slalom flags. My confidence swelled, and my senses heightened as I moved up in the field. I felt so powerful and in the flow that something shook loose in my memory and tumbled to the front of my mind. That's what makes events like Leadville so deep and poetic. A 100-mile grind at altitude will wring everything out of you. And as I flew up Powerline, I saw the scared kid who used to look for exits because he was blind to his own possibilities. My stuttering surfaced midway through 3rd grade in my 2nd year in Brazil, Indiana. By the time I was in 5th, I couldn't say 3 words without stammering. It was especially bad around grown-ups and strangers, and at its absolute worst when public speaking was involved. I'll never forget the school play. Everyone knew I stuttered, but since participation was mandatory, my teacher mercifully assigned me a role with just one line. I practiced it at home 100 times. Sometimes I'd stumble. Usually it came out smooth and wrinkle-free, but under those stage lights, I locked up. The silence was intolerable. There were 15, 20 people in attendance at most. All of them were parents, and you couldn't ask for a more supportive audience. Everyone waited patiently, almost willing me to speak. A few of my classmates snickered, but most were rooting for me. My teacher watched with wide, sensitive eyes as my lower lip trembled. I knew it was hopeless, so I turned and left the stage without even trying. I went to a small Catholic school. Everyone in my grade had known me for years, and I was relatively comfortable around them. Most had been there when my stuttering began midway through 3rd grade, and they'd watched it mutate into a curse I couldn't escape when I was asked to read aloud in class. Sometimes I had to read a couple of sentences, especially when we were learning the definitions of new words. Often, it would be a paragraph or two, which made it even worse, because then, not only was my stammering an issue, but the fact that I struggled to read was also on blast. In those moments, time stopped, and I felt completely exposed. It didn't matter that my curse had been nourished by past trauma and the anxiety of being the only black kid in a white school. In my mind, I was now the stupid black kid who stuttered, and nothing more. My failure felt heavier than it actually was, and my anxiety around public speaking only grew. It got to the point where whenever the teacher called on us to read aloud, one after another, I would count paragraphs ahead, and at the most strategic moment, ask for a bathroom break, unless I faked a headache or nausea to get sent home for the rest of the day. My entire existence in that school was built around avoiding exposure. It wasn't about studying or improving. It was about dodging bullets, because all I could see was incoming fire, which limited my ability to learn and grow. I started cheating to keep up, because my stuttering convinced me I couldn't hang in the classroom, and that there was nothing for me in those school books. My last thoughts before I fell asleep each night, and my first upon waking, were of my own insignificance, stupidity, and worthlessness. Due to my hard upbringing, I was more aware of how the world worked than most 5th graders, and I couldn't help but wonder how the fuck I was going to get through life if I couldn't get a word out. What became of people like that? The thought terrified me. My world was closing in because my stuttering ruled me. It was all I could see, hear, and feel. There was no available space for any positive thought to take root in my brain. So I gravitated towards shortcuts and hunted emergency exits. For many people, the haunting begins the minute they wake up. Maybe they are fat or disabled, feel ugly or failing, and overwhelmed at school or work, and it consumes them. Their obsession with their own imperfections and faults suffocates self-respect and submarines progress. And from the time they get out of bed until they are able to crawl back in that night, the only thing on their agenda is avoiding exposure and surviving another day in hell. When that's how you feel about yourself, it's impossible to see possibilities or seize opportunities. We all have the ability to be extraordinary, but most of us, and especially the haunted ones, tap out of the crucible and never experience what it's like to get to the other side of hell. My metamorphosis was a brutal process that unfolded over decades, but eventually I became the polar opposite of the kid frozen in the hot stage lights and the gaze of his teacher who only wanted to teach him to read. I became a full-time savage who walked the distant, narrow path with cliffs rising on both sides, no aid stations or rest areas, and no turnouts or exits of any kind. Whatever popped up in front of me had to be dealt with head on, because the full-time savage sees everything in life as an opportunity to learn, adapt, and evolve. However, when Babbitt's message found me, at first I looked for an exit. Then I pulled my head out of my ass and found a way. Now, over 75 miles into one of the most difficult races on Earth, I felt unnaturally strong, which is exactly why those images from my 5th grade play continue to run on a loop in my mind's eye. Your strongest moments will often make you think of your weakest. I was pushing so hard, my perspective ran deep, and I felt for that kid, knowing he allowed situations to dominate him for way too long. But I was proud of him too, for overcoming all of that. It is truly amazing what that little motherfucker accomplished. The descent from Powerline is on a fire road sprayed with so many rocks and boulders, it's difficult to find sure footing. But I made good time. From then on, whenever the trail leveled off, I ran. When the incline cranked back up, I used poles and hiked faster than I ever had before. Leadville was a purging of my soul. All the questions I had coming into the event about my inner drive and physical ability were answered. It was as if the high-altitude racecourse itself was a sculptor, and I was its marble masterpiece in progress, the image of a savage reborn. Every mile I ran, another chunk of rock fell away, and I came into the final aid station at mile 87 thinking how crazy it was that a few days earlier it looked like I might have to walk the whole thing. Now, with just 13 miles to go, my legs still had a lot left. During my time in the aid station, I absorbed the scene. Some runners staggered in. Others laughed and joked with their crews while they ate and rehydrated. All of us were almost through a barbaric rite of passage. But after it was all over, how many would use it as an opportunity to ask deeper questions of their body and mind, and demand more of themselves? Leadville 2019 was populated with plenty of part-time savages, people who dial up their training for 6 or 7 months, complete a race of a lifetime, and then sit back and do nothing else like it for years. As I headed out to run one last leg, I no longer wondered if I'd finish. The question now became, where would that finish line lead me? For the next 2 miles, when the trail pitched toward the peaks, TJ